I see some folks still joining us, but I want to say good afternoon to everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. This webinar is part of our greater summer series of webinars that we're hosting from ACE by TSK. You can find us on acebytsk.com. And we have a tab for webinars. You can find our webinars every single week there. You can register through the link on our website. And every single week, thank you so much, Jeff. Every single week, we will be hosting a new webinar. You can see what's coming up next week throughout the whole summer through mid-September. So we hope you guys will, thank you for joining us today, and we hope you'll keep joining us throughout the whole summer. Yes, wonderful. So with that, I would like to take a quick second to thank all of our wonderful sponsors who make this series possible. So that's City Quiet Windows and Doors, that's Easy Management, the Falcon Group, who we have here today for an amazing presentation, Hotwire, K. Bender Rembaum, KBR, Nouveau Florida, Oracle Profitability, The Paving Lady, Plastridge Insurance, South State Bank, United Professional Engineering, Vote HOA Now. So thank you to all who joined. I know sometimes, especially through our partnership with Oracle Profitability, we have some folks who hopefully may even be joining us from Arizona today. So we're glad if anybody has joined us to be sharing this content with you by way of that partnership. So most of you probably joining us are based here in Florida. For anybody who's joined us from outside of the state, we do appreciate that you're here today. So like I said, throughout the whole summer, we'll be hosting weekly webinars. You can find those webinars on acebytsk.com/webinars. With that, I will turn it over to our speaker for the day. Towards the end of this presentation, about 3/4 of the way through, we will add a link in the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So thank you so much, David, for being here. David is a wealth of knowledge. He always does a fantastic job. So over to you, David, and let's get it started.
Thank you, Marielle. Hopefully, share.
Awesome. Looks great.
First, like I guess Marielle said, I'd like to welcome everybody. Appreciate you taking a time out of your day to go over this very important subject that has been certainly the subject of quite a bit of discussion here in the state of Florida. What we're going to talk about today's a little of an overview about what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Milestone, structural integrity reserve studies, why they're important, why we use them. And then we're also going to learn a little bit about what the process that's involved in going through them, what associations need to do, what the engineers are going to do, kind of the role of the local authority having jurisdiction, and how to wrap it up. So how did we get here? I think we just now actually passed the unfortunate 3rd-year anniversary of what happened in Surfside. That is, this legislation was a more or less a direct result of the deficiencies that happened down there. And we're finding is that comes out as to what happened, that there's more than maintenance that was involved, but maintenance was a factor that was involved. So the legislature decided that they wanted to make sure that associations could have enough money to do the maintenance that's required. So that's why SB 4 came about, was signed into law in 2022, and it does create some rather substantial new structural safety and reserve requirements. As I've said in these presentations many times before, for a lot of associations that were doing what they should have been doing anyways, it's still going to be some potential increase in cost, but it shouldn't be quite as bad as hopefully everybody said. But it's, again, the most important thing is that this is intended to make sure that the buildings are safe to occupy. So where does this apply? If you live in Florida, it applies in every county in Florida now. There used to be a time when only Miami-Dade and Broward would require some type of structural certification. And that is not the case anymore. So even if you're Up in the Panhandle, this applies to you. Um, yeah, and this is where I would track a little bit. Marielle mentioned that possibly others in other states are listening to this. And so I would, advise you consult someone in your particular state as to what may be necessary. We have offices in New York, New Jersey. We have some similar requirements in those areas. But this is where I would say that even if the legislation decided for some reason, and they will not do this, but suppose some strange happening that they decided, oh, we're not going to require this anymore. Unfortunately, the cat's out of the bag. So while the state may or may not continue, but again, that's highly unlikely. This is something that's going to be around for a while. Regardless, insurance companies and mortgage companies have now picked up on this, and we're seeing again and again where I'm getting calls from associations that said, hey, this mortgage company is asking for this. Our insurance company is asking for this. Our insurance company says if we don't do this, we're not going to have insurance. So, again, while I firmly do not believe that this is going away at the state level, it's you're seeing it even more and more. So if you're in another state like Arizona, it could very well be that now that the insurance companies are a little more aware of a risk that they perhaps overlooked in the past. You may very well see it there as well. So we're going to be talking about milestones and structural integrity reserve studies. And I always like to kind of say that we're comparing apples and oranges here. So we're going to talk today a little bit about what is a milestone, what the certification entails, requirements for it, going into phase one, phase two, which was a big issue when this first came out. Kind of what we do, what we look at, and finally how to submit. We're going to submit the reports and some things to think about. The structural integrity reserve study, talk a little bit about what it is, elements, requirements that for the associations, and a little bit of hopefully clarifying some confusion between the two. And so the way I like to look at it, and I have apples and oranges on the slides here. At one point, I was thinking about putting a stopwatch in a calendar, because the MSI is a snapshot of today, right now. What does your building look like? What do I have to do today or in the near future to make sure that my building is going to be safe and secure for the next 10 years? Whereas a structural integrity reserve study is a financial tool, a planning document. How do I make sure that in 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, 15 years, that when these items come to be replaced or repaired or renovated, that the association makes sure that we have enough money within in the bank and within our reserves to make sure that we can actually perform these particular projects. So as again, we talked about, the milestone was created as a creature of statute in 2022. There were some updates in 2023, and in the 2024 session, the legislation pretty much left milestone and SIRS untouched. They did do some other things, and I believe we had a webinar for the recent past year where KBR updated some of the newer information. But when it came to milestones and SIRS, pretty much from 2023 is the latest update. So for a milestone inspection, how does that have to be done? Well, first, it has to be done by a licensed architect or a licensed engineer. And it's a visual inspection for the most part. And we'll get into phase one, phase two, where it may go beyond being a physical inspection. And again, the purpose is to evaluate all of the building structure and make sure that the structure is going to be safe. So we'll go over a little bit about what we're looking for, because again, it's just a visual evaluation of the property. So when all of this started out, we had some issues about what's phase one, phase two, and big concerns over the engineers are all going to want to go to phase two. we at Falcon and many of our competitors as well down here in South Florida have been doing this type of evaluation for many, many years. And so we know from a visual standpoint what needs to be done, what needs to be addressed, and we know where we really need to dig in and look a little bit deeper. General rule of thumb, we find that out of 100 buildings that we do, uh, maybe one of them will need to go to a phase two. On the unfortunate side of that, we also find that out of that same 100, only two or three can get away without having any work necessary. And those are usually ones that have literally just come out of a major restoration project. And they know that the buildings are in good shape. So again, the visual inspection phase one, I said it pertains to the entire property. A little clarification on that. It's came out again in 2023. It is what the association has control over. So if there's commercial space in the property that the association doesn't have control over, that doesn't necessarily apply in this. So again, there's some areas that kind of don't make sense. If there's structural part of the building, how can they not? Still working out some of those issues. Talk about I think we went over this slide. So the phase one inspection, again, it must be performed by a licensed engineer or architect. We're looking for any substantial deterioration, is what the statute says. And in practice, what we've done is we're looking at a potential defect, and I'll show you some of them coming up here with real pictures from real properties is what we're looking for. We're looking at evaluating from the standpoint of if we allow this to go and it's not addressed anytime in the next 10 years, is this going to cause a major problem for the association? So those are the items that we identify. And on the electrical side, there's some other things. And we'll talk about electrical a little bit when we get there as to what is involved in the electrical side, because there are some areas that do require electrical evaluations in addition to the structural, but that's not at the state level. That is a local level requirement. And again, we'll talk about that in just a few moments. But again, it's to determine what needs to be done. And the association's responsible for all of the cost performing a milestone inspection. At first, I kind of thought that was a duh. Had an attorney talk to me about that was again talking about some of the areas where potentially the association doesn't have control, such as the commercial spaces and such. And again, what they're responsible for. So now we talk about phase two. Okay, so when this requirement first came out in 2022, heard a lot of pundits say, oh, again, every engineer is going to want to rip everything apart. They're going to want to look at everything. They're, from a liability standpoint, they're not going to want to leave anything. Again, this is an area we are used to looking at and evaluating based on visual. From my personal involvement, I have only had one property ever go into a phase two. I know at Falcon we've had several others, but again, that's usually the exception, not the rule. And the one that I had was a property down the Keys that was 2 stories living area over a parking area. And we saw a lot of failure visually above the ground on one of the columns. And in order to figure out what was going on and what needed to be done, we had to go to more of a phase two evaluation where we had to shore it up, dig it out, and look at the footer, see what's underneath. And then we started evaluating the column itself to make sure the column was built correctly. And as it turns out, we found out that the footers were not installed in accordance with design. And so that's how we had to fix it and make the repairs. But again, that's literally the only phase two that I've had to do. So why is that? So a lot of these structural issues, especially concrete restoration is a good example. it doesn't make sense for the engineer to tear the structure apart and then put a temporary repair in, and then have a contractor come in back in and tear the temporary repair out and do a permanent fix. So usually the way this is handled, and we have a completely different presentation on concrete restoration. I don't think we've done it as part of this series, but I believe we do have it out there somewhere in recording. So in concrete restoration, going a little bit afar from today's presentation, but what happens is your engineer will work side by side with your contractor, and in areas that we identify as needing attention, we'll do the destructive testing, if you will, at that time, and evaluate exactly what needs to be done. How much rebar needs to be replaced? How far back do we need to go with the rebar? Is it a full repair, partial repair? And so we do that during the restoration project, because again, that's what really is the best use of money for the association. Now, for those that do need to go to the phase two, there's some timeframes. And this is where, again, the authority having jurisdiction starts getting concerned, and they want to make sure that you are actually following up with what you need to do. The biggest part is it generally needs to be done within 365 days. So how do we start this process? It starts with generally the engineer has a conversation with the association, both of the property manager, as it says here, but we also frequently will talk with the property engineer, if there is one, board members. On occasion, again, we will send out questionnaires on occasions, depending upon the particular project, property and project scope. We're going to want documents from the association, any of the original drawings if they're available. And again, I know for a number of buildings that were built, 50, 60 years ago, those may be hard to come by. But we're definitely going to want to see any documents from repairs that have been performed in the past, any structural reports, anything that tells us what has been done with the building. And again, we're going to want to see this stuff before we go out, so that way we can kind of plan our day as to our days, depending upon your property, and make best use of our time to make sure we're looking at what we need to look at. And so what are we looking at? At the state level, at this point, only thing that is needed is structural. There are a handful of municipalities down here in South Florida and West Palm Beach. You don't really need to do the electrical. Boca in Palm Beach is the only one I think that comes to my mind. Possibly Delray. I don't have my notes, but I know for Boca you have to do the electrical as part of your structural evaluation. And then, of course, Broward and all of Miami-Dade, as part of their now 30-year program, you have to do electrical inspections. But if you're in the city of West Palm Beach or Martin County, Indian County, all the way up, I'm not sure how far we're reaching. If you're in one of the other counties, definitely need to check your local municipality. But chances are, again, if you're just going under the state statute, you do not have to do electrical. And this would be a good kind of jumping off points to talk about it as well. There's a little bit of confusion and misunderstanding as to how the program works. It is a state statute. It was created as part of a state legislative session, but it is run at the local level. So these reports will not be submitted to the state. They'll be submitted to your local building official. So wherever you go to pull a permit, that's who is going to receive the report. We're still working on coming up to speed. Some areas are better than others. The way it's supposed to work is the municipality or where you are supposed to send you a notice that tells you, hey, your building's in this age, time frame that you need. You need to have this done within a certain amount of time. And this would be a good point where we didn't really go over at the beginning, but who needs to have a milestone inspection. So generally, it's any building that's 30 year, any condominium or co-op that's 30 years or older. There's a little bit of exception to that. The local HJ, if you're right on the coast, may say that you have to have it within 25 years or at 25 years. That was a slight change in the 23 legislature. The 22 legislature used the coastal construction line, basically. That was confusing to a lot of people, so they just, again, allow the local authority having jurisdiction to set that time frame, whether it's 25 or 30 years in the location of your property. So generally, if you're within 3 miles of the coast, it's probably going to be 25 years. If you're further than that away, it's going to be 30 years. But again, it's any condominium or co-op that is 3 stories or taller has to have this done. And so what are we looking at as far as particular structural? We're looking at the facade and any accessible structural elements. If we can see the columns that we're looking at, any footers, are not going to be visible without tearing them up. So we're not really going to be able to see that stuff. We're going to be looking at waterproofing, exterior painting, what kind of condition that's in, because that's, while paint is not waterproofing, it is your first line of defense against water. So if the painting's not kept up, that's can potentially allow the start of water coming in. We need to look at windows, doors, balcony railings. This was again an area where in the 2022 session was led to a lot of confusion. As I said, windows and doors, and rightfully a lot of associations raised their hands and said, hey, wait a minute, windows and doors, those are the responsibility of the unit owner. How can we be responsible? So in the 23 session, again, the legislature clarified that and said that this is only for the items that is controlled by the association. Beg some questions, but we'll leave those for a later time. And again, we're looking at the pool deck, see what's happening with the structure there. Again, roof structure, garage structure, and depending upon where the property is located, the seawall. Some seawalls, have no impact on the building. They can be fairly far away. And there are others that, we have tiebacks in the seawalls that tie close to the building structure, and a loss of them could result in a loss of structure. Then we need to take a look at that. And a very good example of this is what happened in the past year up in Daytona Beach shores. If I remember my numbers correctly, I think there's 26 high-rise condominiums in Daytona Beach shores. 24 of them were seriously damaged enough that they had to have major work or even be shut down. And a lot of those were because it's not, the retaining walls there, so we kind of use that term loosely. The retaining walls that they had failed because of the 2 hurricanes that hit them, or I'm sorry, tropical storm and hurricane that hit them within a very short period of time. So that caused issues with the foundation of the building shifting. So in those instances, we would have to look at the seawall. Other structures where the seawall's 100 yards away, not going to impact it if it fails, make the argument those aren't necessarily included. On the electrical side, so again, if you're in Broward, Miami-Dade, Boca, Hillsborough are the ones that come readily to mind. You also have to do the electrical conditions. Unfortunately for the electrical conditions, this is again another area of controversy. We will frequently have to go into the individual units and look for evaluations. It's again a tough area with that one. Be careful with. Again, with Boca and Broward, Miami-Dade, we're required to do thermal scanning, and illumination studies is really only required by Miami-Dade at this point. This is again where I kind of say stay tuned for this cycle. Again, if you're outside of those areas, you only have to do structural. Again, however, as I've said, we've been doing Miami-Dade for quite some time, and one of the issues, not really issue, but one of the things we found down there through the years, their 40-year program has really started to grow and grow and grow, and adding things. So stay tuned. If you're around in the next 10 years when this cycle comes due again for all the milestone reports, uh, there may be more requirements that are included. But for today, the vast majority of the state, again, you're not going to need the electrical. So what are we looking for? So now the favorite part that everybody likes to see is war stories from out in the field. So here's a number of things that we're looking at. For example, the water ponding. As I sit here right now, as I have my window to my right, I'm looking outside that it's raining. If I were to go up on the roof, I would expect to see some areas of ponding. On the other hand, if we don't have any more rain over the next 48 hours, and I go up there and I still see ponding, then that's an issue, and I start getting concerned about it. So, ponding after it's rained is not a big deal, but I'm looking for ponding where it's been 2, 3, 4 days after the rain, and we're still seeing water up on the roof. That's a potential issue. Again, alligatoring is just the roof is cracking. So again, we're looking at potential sources of water intrusion. Any kind of a gap on the exterior is certainly going to give you water intrusion. This is where I like to say I steal a line from my brother. My brother lives in Daytona Beach Shores, and we also here in the West Palm office do work up in that area. He's currently serving on the board, and one of the things that he says is that there's 3 things here in the state of Florida that you need to do to make sure you maintain your property that's close to the beach, and it really kind of applies everywhere, but especially close to the beach. And number 1 is you need to keep the water out, and closely related is number 2, you need to keep the water out, and number 3, as you might imagine, is you got to keep the water out. So again, a lot of the stuff that we're seeing is a result of water getting in and causing damages. And so what we see on this screen and some of the stuff we're looking for, delaminated cracking stucco on the balcony ceiling. That means water has gotten in, most likely on the balcony above. So this brings up another point where I get asked frequently, can I do an evaluation with tile on the balcony? And I say that for the most part, we can do evaluations with tile on the balcony and not have to rip it off. Even when we get to the restoration, we don't necessarily have to rip off every piece of tile on the balcony, because we know that is a hot button for a lot of associations, and understandably so. And so a lot of times we can see damages. For example, on this particular page, unfortunately, if there's tile on that balcony, that tile will have to be removed in order for us to repair if a full repair is needed there. Sometimes we can just repair from the bottom, and that's all where it's at. But if a full repair is needed there, unfortunately, the tile has to come up. Some of the others that we're looking at, painting and peeling, again, it's not it's not a structural issue, major structural issue necessarily, but it's an issue that if you don't take care of it in relatively short order, things are going to become even worse. This is the cracked and spalling. The column is a good example. Again, what happens is water gets in, it gets into the rebar. That rebar, as it starts to corrode, starts to expand, and then that's what causes the concrete to fail. Again, another good picture of, we see this frequently on the left side here, where the column has been corroded and popping out. Occasionally in parking garages like this, we also occasionally see physical damage to the columns, but that's rare. To the right, again, is another area where it has kind of gotten away. Again, fortunately, we don't see a tons and tons of properties like this, but enough that these are points to point out. We talked about the seawalls, again, just real brief on those. If this is close to the tiebacks, we're looking at king piles is compromised there. Again, we're just looking at making sure that We're not seeing these corrosion marks and things like that that indicate potential failures. The railing height less than 42 inches. This brings up another, what I know is a kind of a hot spot in dealing with this, with kind of ties back into the tile. So occasionally, the unit owners will put the tile on, and now it's just exactly like you can see there, we're only at 41.5 inches. Well, the code requires 42 inches. And so this is again, an area where it's a code violation that really needs to be addressed. Other things we're looking at on the windows, looking for, again, the metal, where we got metal to metal. Caulking is failing, where we have, we definitely want to look and make sure that there's no stucco to metal that's there, because that causes a lot of corrosion issues. A lot of these are, as we're looking at here, are on unit, and that gets us into a discussion that really needs to be had almost on a property by property discussion as to how to handle that, even though it may potentially be the unit owner's responsibility. Because if it's not addressed, it has the potential of impacting all of the association. Some more things that we look for. Again, pool deck that's cracking. This is especially more so important if we're over a parking deck versus just not on ground. And minor cracks that, anytime concrete cracks, that tells us that it's moving, and so we kind of need to figure out why is it moving. Looking for, again, corrosion, water setting in the hallways, spalling in the concrete. Those are all things that we look at to know that need to be addressed. So this was one of the big changes that the state made. Again, it's probably be a good point to talk about Miami-Dade having this requirement around for quite some time. And when we first started this, people would raise their hand and say, "Hey, got a question. Wasn't Surfside in Miami-Dade? So why are they building a program around a program that didn't really seem to do what it should have done?" And the answer to that is the focus. I know when Surfside collapsed, I personally had projects where we were 2 and 3 years behind in submitting the 40-year certifications, and the local authorities having jurisdictions really didn't pay any attention. They really didn't enforce it. Some did, some didn't, depending on the property and which AHJ. But it didn't have the focus that it has now. And more importantly, the insurance companies and mortgage companies, this wasn't even on their radar. And so after Surfside collapse, the dollars that they had to expend, as I said, now they're setting up and taking notice. And because of that, even if the AHJs don't push it, they will. And again, either people will not sell their properties, at least not on the FHA side. They'll only have to be cash or conventional if you don't have this. And also, again, the insurance companies just will say, you're not doing what you need to do. We're not underwriting you here in the state of Florida. So that's really why the attention has been, why they're using the Miami-Dade. It is a good program from a technical standpoint. It has us looking at the things we need to look at. It's just that it raises, the importance again of why this needs to be done and not ignored. But again, one of the changes with the Miami-Dade 40-year was we submitted that to the association, and then it was up to the association to submit it to the local authority, of course, along with a check. That has changed under the state legislature. Now, as the engineer, again, architect, same responsibility. I have to submit this directly to the AHJ. One of the other things that's kind of funny that happened with the authorizing legislation, They have tasked a group at the state level to come up with standardized forms. Again, all these milestones are due by the end of 2024, and the deadline for the state to come up with the forms is the end of 2024. So there's not a standard form out there yet in a lot of areas. Miami-Dade and Broward have kind of stepped forward in this. So Miami-Dade has actually already announced and made changes to their program where they are adopting now a 30-year program that will meet the state requirements. So they have already promulgated forms many years ago. And so the Miami-Dade forms and Broward forms for those areas will will be, what's required to be used. That's what they need to submit. And for other areas that where we've done this, and here in West Palm Beach and Martin counties and north, we've kind of adopted the Miami-Dade Broward County forms because we suspect that the state, when they finally come out with it, they're going to be very similar. So what are some things that the association should think about? Again, with changes compared to the 40-year inspection of Miami-Dade and Broward, there's also a bit of a transparency requirement. Association has to deliver a copy to the members or unit owners within 45 days. You have to give notices, and I'll let you read the stuff on the slide. But one of the important things, if you're sitting here today and you haven't done the milestone or the SIRS, there is a typically cost savings associated with doing them together with the same company, because a lot of the inspections that we have to do for the two of them are very similar. And so if we do a milestone inspection, we're able to utilize the information from that to do the SIRS. There's on a case-by-case basis, sometimes, we're able to look at a milestone and use that information to create a SIRS, but again, that's kind of a case-by-case basis depending upon the milestone report and what they did, how comfortable we feel, because as an engineer, we're kind of basically adopting their work. So again, if you're sitting here, haven't done either one of them, that's something to take into account. Again, as I said, we have a whole different study, and not only that, I see that I've spent about 40 minutes of my time on the milestone, so I really want to try and jump forward, talk about SIRS and what we do there. Again, most of the time, there's some kind of repair that needs to be done after we've done the milestone report, and the same is true for a lot of other milestone reports I've seen. Again, the engineers are picking up that the associations need to address these items in order to get a clean bill of health. And so it should be treated the same as any other repair project. Most of the time, you're going to need a permit. It would be good to hire an engineer to prepare, so that way you can have bids that kind of come across equally, and certainly would recommend hiring a qualified contractor. So with that, let's jump into the structural integrity reserve studies with a little bit of time that we have left. It's not intended to say that the SIRS are not as important, but the milestones have gotten the most coverage, if you will. But the structural integrity reserve study is a little bit more broad in its requirements. So who needs to have a SIRS? Again, pretty much any condominium or co-op that's 3 stories or greater, you have to have a SIRS. And that SIRS has to be done before the end of 2024. And one of the things that I would definitely recommend at this point, I know that here at Falcon, we're scheduling, here in West Palm, we're scheduling about 4 to 6 weeks out for evaluations. I know our Miami office is actually about 8 to 10 weeks. And I'm aware of some of my competitors that I've remained friendly with that quite frankly wouldn't be able to get to you this year. That's how busy they are and how much they've done. So this is something, if you haven't started that, I realize we've still got 6 months. definitely something you need to move forward with if you haven't yet. So again, going back, looking at what is a SERS. A SERS is just like a capital reserve study, only is required by statute. It is important to understand it is a financial planning tool. And as a result of that, it should be done by an engineer or architect, where the 2023 also opened it up to reserve specialist in recognition of that this is a financial tool. Yes, there are evaluations that are done. So again, we go in, we evaluate the common areas, we look at not just structural like we would in a milestone, but this is a little bit more opened up. And on the next slide, we'll talk about what we look at, but there's mechanical, electrical, plumbing issues that we look at that have to be part of the SERS. Once we go out on site, we'll do an evaluation. Then we'll take that information, we'll bring it back into the office. Based on what we've seen, we will evaluate the life that's left in the structure, in how long overall we believe that it could be, then how much the replacement costs are. And again, we'll put all that together in a report to be able to come up with a number. And I don't think it's mentioned on this, but we're now allowed to use inflation to be able to make sure that, again, that fund is growing as needed, so that when you do the projects, you have the money in place. Now, that's not to say if you have a SERS, you're not going to have to do special assessment or anything. Unfortunately, a lot of stuff that are covered under the SERS are commodities based. I've been in the construction industry for decades now. I remember a couple of decades back with sheet metal. At the time, I was working for a sheet metal contractor doing HVAC ductwork. We literally, because the volatile pricing at that time, would literally only give bids that were valid for 1 week, because that's all the more we could hold them. And while we don't typically see that kind of volatility, we do see ups and downs. So it's again, SERS is not guaranteeing you can't do a special assessment, but it's really reducing the likelihood. Again, another that I don't think that we covered on the slides, and I apologize if I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Within the structural integrity reserve studies, you can use a pooled fund, and which means if it's within the SERS, you can, it's one fund that accounts for each of the different items. Now, what you can't do is you can't have a capital reserve study and a structural integrity reserve study and have the money go back and forth between them. That is not permissible. Some of the other issues that you'll have to deal with if you have a capital reserve study, and I hope you do, because they're vitally important. If you have a capital reserve studies, there are going to be some things that are on your capital reserve that you have money for right now. For example, roof and painting, typically, that are going to need to move to the SERS. And so one of the questions that I get as well is, how do we handle that? And the answer to that is it's a case by case basis. It's generally a board decision. But the most important is you don't want to carry a roof in one and a roof in another. And again, I caveat a lot of this with it could be very particular to your association. For example, if you have some that are subject to SERS and some that are not, you may have to handle that a little bit differently. And so I would, again, if you have those situations, you should talk to, both legal counsel and an engineer to kind of figure out how that has to be handled. Because again, the law is not necessarily clear on that. In regards, if you have one association that has some buildings subject to it and some not, again, that definitely is almost an area where you really need to discuss more with counsel than an engineer to be able to handle that. But we can be there to help you through that with counsel. So when, again, this has to be done by the end of 2024. Another question that comes up at this time is, well, hey, someone's talked about this being fully funded. And at one point there was a rather large law firm out there who I won't name that said, oh yeah, what fully funded means is if it's 5 years old, it's a 10-year life, you've got to have 5 years worth of funding in the SERS. One of the things that the statute references is capital reserve studies and reserve studies standards that are out there, CAI. is one that certifies reserve specialists, and they have standards. And that's not what the CAI standard is. The CAI standard for fully funded would mean if you have that item, that's 5 years old with a 10-year life, it's not that you have to have, write a big check this year to make up all the reserves you should have been doing. What it says is you now have 5 years to collect that money instead of 10 years. And so you, in essence, have to double. So again, it's important to remember, why do we have a milestone? Or SIRS rather. I apologize. Why do we have a SIRS? It's so we have the money in the bank when it's time to do the necessary projects. So what's covered in a structural integrity reserve study? A little bit more than in a milestone. In the roof and structure, fireproofing, exterior painting, waterproofing, those are all kind of covered in a milestone, but are also again covered here to make sure that you have the necessary money for every 10 years to do stucco concrete restoration, and painting to go along with that. Waterproofing, planters are a big one out there that are a very expensive item to be able to repair and redo the waterproofing on. So you need to make sure you have the money there. Plumbing systems, and what are we looking for there? Generally, what we put in our reserve studies, our SIRS, is the vertical stacks for sanitary risers and storm risers, making sure that those stay intact. Electrical systems are going to include your generator, emergency generator primarily, potentially depending upon whether you call it fire safety or electrical, your fire alarm systems would be in there. And then the catch-all, any elements that have an impact on the structural integrity of the building. We again had some folks there that the boards want to consider the SIRS as a life safety issue. So if there's a safety concern, and again, that's the point of this SIRS, is making sure all the safety equipment is there. So we have created SIRS that have replacement money for the stairwell pressurization fans for part of the fire system. This is just one example. So again, a lot of it is very specific for your particular property. It's a little bit of requirements. Again, I see we're getting close to time. We'll allow a little bit of time for questions. One of the things that they changed was in 23 versus 22 was now if an item has more than 25 years of useful life, we do not have to include that in the SIRS. So that would be, for example, some of the major structural items. If it's an item that's supposed to last 50 years and we're only in year 10, we don't have to start reserving for that until we get to year 25. One of the others that gets talked about occasionally is the multi-condominium association that can waive it with alternative funding. That again is one that from our review, there are very few, if any, associations that can meet that. But I would strongly recommend, if you think you can meet that, you definitely need to reach out to your legal counsel and seek their counsel as to see whether or not you are potentially able to take advantage of that.
David, I just want to pop on really quick, just to let everybody know that in the chat, you can find the link to the evaluation form. I just want to make sure you guys have time to grab that before we end the Zoom. And I also want to let you guys know that the Q&A is now open. So if you guys do have questions, I know David will be willing to stick around for a few minutes after the hour to answer some questions. So a little bit more to go. I just wanted to make sure, again, in the chat, you guys will find that evaluation form. Thanks so much. Back to you, David.
All right. Thanks, Marielle. And actually, we're kind of almost good timing because we are nearly, we're on the next to last slide. And this is an area, again, that I get questions about. Well, we don't need a SIRS because our building's not 30 years old. It's kind of confusing, the two of them. You don't need the milestone inspection if the building's not 30 years old yet, as of, I believe it was, 2022. So if it was built after before 1992, you definitely need to have the milestone inspections. And again, a caveat that if you're check with your local AHJ because it could be pushed back at 5 years if you were close to the coast. Um, Again, the biggest takeaways that I have from here is time is running out for both of these. If you haven't started, I definitely need to engage an engineer or architectural firm to move forward with the process. Because again, the folks that do this um, are very busy. We are seeing some people come in from out of state. Um, I'm sure they're confident in engineering companies, but again, would caution that uh, they may be the ones that are a little bit, what I found is they're a little more conservative. So again, just kind of talk to your engineering or architectural firm about what kind of experience they have and their thought philosophies on identifying the structural elements. Again, that's probably the biggest takeaway when everybody have is if you haven't started yet, you really need to get started. And with that, I guess we are at the question point. Uh, Let me,
I can read some of these off for you, David. So our first one is, are there new regulations concerning these issues for associations less than 3 stories?
at this point, official regulations, no. Um, and I say some exceptions to that. Again, I know Boynton Beach, which is again here in Palm Beach County. I guess is another one that I forgot to mention that does have some local requirements, and they require if you are a threshold building, which chances are, a 2-story, 14-unit condominium complex is not going to be a threshold building. But there, if you meet the requirements of being a threshold building, doesn't matter if you're a condominium, apartment building, commercial office building. In Boynton Beach, you're required to do the what equivalent of a milestone inspection. But as far as the state for the smaller, I have not seen anything, don't really not hearing anything on the horizon. But again, would caveat that with insurance companies and mortgage companies are definitely waking up to some risks that they've been taking without realizing it.
And then the next one is, how long should it take to get the SIRS back after site visit?
We're running about 3 to 4 weeks to be on site. And then we look to, depend upon how large of a property it is, it can be another 4 to 6 weeks by the time we complete the report, get it through all of our internal reviews and into the hands of the association.
Thank you. Do you, this, I assume they mean, do you think the state is going to relax some of the regulations and required reserve study?
Kind of two different questions there, I think. And I think the answer to both of them is actually kind of the same, not really from what I'm hearing. Um, they had the opportunity to clarify, help a little bit in the 2024 session, and they took no action. I think that inaction speaks volumes. We've been talking to local legislatures that are at the state level, hoping to get some of these things corrected. And there doesn't seem to be much of an appetite at the state level for that really changing. But on the other side, again, at the state level, I don't see a big push for associations that are not required currently to have capital reserve studies for that to come back to being a requirement. Again, those on the line, remember a number of years back, I think we're golly, 8 or 10 years back now, where in one legislative session we were required to have capital reserve studies, and before it could even be implemented, they withdrew that in the very next session. I do not see that happening. I see continuing to move ahead pretty much as it is. But again, I can't stress enough the insurance companies and mortgage companies are really more taking over. And again, even if you have an association that's 2 stories, or less, a capital reserve study is an excellent idea. Again, that way you don't have to come up with the funding. And I realize there are some there's certain properties that uh, the owners may think nothing of writing a $100,000 check, but I have a feeling most association, their unit owners are not in that situation. So that's why it's a great idea to have a capital reserve study, even if it's not required.
I just want to thank you, David. I just want to make mention for anybody who joined us late that you can fill out the evaluation form, which we've linked in the chat. Once you fill out the evaluation form, upon submitting it, the page that will come up will show you an option to download and access the slides. You'll also have an opportunity to re-watch this session. It'll be recorded and put up on acebytsk.com under our resources section, where you can also review our other webinars from the summer series, as well as other videos and content that we've created. So yes, you definitely have a chance to have access to the information. So I want to skip around a minute because we have a bunch of more questions. We have a few people asking to reiterate, or let's see, actually. We're just about to start a major concrete restoration project. Our engineer is very busy and not sure if he can do the Milestone or SIRS. What would you recommend?
This is actually one of the changes that we've seen in the last 2 years. Right after this happened, I had a 40-year inspection that I was doing for Broward County property. I literally wanted a weekend to work on it. And the city of Oakland Park, great folks, not knocking them. I've got a lot of friends down there, including within the government. I understand where they were coming from, and they just said, nope, can't do that. There's actually some provisions in the I think 22 or sorry 23 that allowed. Uh, I think the AHJs are going to be willing to work with you more. And again, it's important to understand, like we talked about, even though it's a quote unquote state requirement, it is your local authority having jurisdiction that is going to be enforcing it. And so we've been finding that they've been a lot more flexible, if you will. You may have to, again, you'll present a report that says you have to do these repairs, and then they'll work with you. Just making the biggest thing that they want to make sure is you don't get the report and throw it in the drawer and leave it and don't do anything on it. So we've been finding that they've been starting to become a lot more flexible and understanding that, one, contractors are very busy, engineers are very busy, and we probably don't have enough resources here in the state of Florida to potentially get everything done. And so the local HJs have been giving some flexibility to be able to address that. So that's, the important thing that I would advise is, reach out to them, don't wait. If it looks like it's going to be an issue. The big thing, as long as you're showing progress, you've engaged an engineer or architect, or even to the point where you've already got the concrete restoration project underway, and be able to talk to them. I think you'll find 3 years hence from Surfside that they're a lot more willing to make that happen.
We have a couple questions similar to this one. If you adopt your budget in 2024 for 2025, is it correct that your SIRS monies do not need to get collected until 2026?
Ooh. This is one where I wish I had my buddy Peter from KBR here with me to be able to answer that. As much as I hate to do it, I would really defer to counsel as to how to handle that. That's really more of a legal issue than a technical issue.
Thank you. And you guys can, get in touch with KBR right through our site, through our directory. Let's see. Could you possibly go over once again the requirements for windows and doors specifically?
Yes. So this is again where we really need to have a discussion as an association as to how to handle it. Again, understand different associations depending upon their decks, have different responsibilities for who's responsible for the windows. As it stands in the statute, it says only what the association controls. And so if the unit owner is responsible for For example, the stucco to metal caulking on the outside, technically, yeah, that shouldn't be something that's on the SERS. It still could be something that's identified on the milestone, because again, is an issue that could impact the structure of the entire building. But from what I've seen of some associations, they have addressed this in such a way that they handle it during the restoration project, but then through a funding mechanism, basically bill it back to the individual unit owner. And that's a lot more cost effective way. Say for example, we have a 37-story building, and the unit owners on the 34th floor. It's not like we're getting the step ladder out to be able to caulk the windows. Whereas if we're doing restoration, we are going to have the swing stages out there, everything ready to go. So it's worth a discussion within the association. And again, this is leading astray from technical. And again, we refer to, unfortunately, legal counsel to be able to get some guidance as to how to handle those issues that are really unit owner responsibilities, but make economic sense to do during the restoration project. So we've been able to handle it that way as part of the overall project. But the technical legal side, again, I would leave to counsel.
Thank you, David. And we have a couple questions, just kind of confirming a structural reserve study does not have to be done until a building is 30 years old.
That's part of the confusion. No, the structural integrity reserve study, if you have a building, a condominium or co-op, and it can be either, that is more than, there's 3 stories or taller, you have to have the SERS done. And again, it has to be done for any budget adopted for after January 21, 2025. So effectively, it has to be done by the end of this year.
No matter how old the building.
Correct.
Okay, that answered a few of the questions.
Yeah.
Great. How much time do you have when you know that you need to assess? How do you safeguard the money, and can you use the interest? This is an interesting one.
That is an interesting question. And it always kind of leads up to, I was actually just having a discussion with someone this morning in regards to this. In construction projects, I've never, again, I've been doing this for multiple decades in various forms of their various fields, all related to construction. Construction projects are unlike really kind of any other consumer good in that you can't really have an exact number. And so the idea is you kind of budget for it, and after you do the milestone, a lot of times, again, we will do quantities, and we'll be able to come up with a budgetary number prior to going out to bid, and prior to doing the formal RFP. And that will give an association a good idea. And typically, we recommend adding a pretty high contingency onto those numbers of perhaps as much as 30 to 40%, compared to much smaller contingencies. If you're replacing your rooftop unit or your cooling tower, your chiller, a 10% contingency could be good for those. But unfortunately, this is again what I was talking about earlier, where good use of association's money, it makes a lot more sense to, I could go out and spend weeks evaluating a building to come up with and get you down to a 15% contingency, but you're probably going to spend $200,000 plus with me. So it would make a lot more sense to spend that money fixing the building. And so really kind of, I guess, to answer the question, if I understand it more directly, you should have a good idea for budgeting after the milestone, and to be able to go to the bank to be able to get that, or go again, do the special assessments. And I mix up a little bit again. We up in again, we have offices in New York and New Jersey, and when I talk to my reserve folks up there, they're confused about special assessments. They say, we just go to the bank, but that is unfortunately is not the way it works down here in Florida. We rely a lot more on special assessments. And so that gives them the budget for the special assessment. In regards to the interest, again, I think that's really kind of getting out of my wheelhouse as an engineer, and would again recommend talking to council about that.
Thank you, David. I think this is an interesting one. Is there an accepted price range for engineers slash architects to perform the phase one inspection? We're seeing a wide variance in estimates we're getting.
I think, very similar to attorneys, engineers and architects charge really based on the amount of hours we think that it's going to take. There isn't really a set fee. The market's kind of adjusting. One of the things that I have seen, again, prior to all this happening, I used to do reserve studies as well. They tended to be a very low cost item. I know that even large buildings could get reserve studies done for $1,000, $1,500. Today, those buildings are looking more at $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 just to do a capital reserve study as the market has increased. And so again, I would say, look closely at what they're proposing. There isn't a magic number that I could see out there, but as the old caveat goes, you typically get what you pay for. But the most important thing is, read the proposals. After we get proposals, we are more than willing to either come or have a virtual meeting like this with the board. I've even had some fun with, even opening up to unit owners, meetings just to ask Q&A questions. The other thing that I personally like to do, especially on the milestones, is I like to have the project manager with me that's going to be actually doing it. So, ask questions of whoever it is, and make sure that you feel comfortable with the scope and that you understand what you're buying. But unfortunately, engineering and architectural services, much like wall services, are not inexpensive.
David, could somebody hire the Falcon Group if their association is already working with an engineer to consult and make sure that that things are kind of proper and in place?
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'm just working with an association today to actually do kind of a peer review of their milestone report and their servers to just kind of give my thoughts on areas that they had some, the board obviously had some concerns, believed that the engineer wasn't addressing it right. And yeah, we do that all the time.
Makes a lot of sense.
It's called peer reviewed, and it's not not infrequent that the same thing happens to us. That some of our competitors will do a peer review on our work, and it's actually usually it makes all of us a little bit better. So that's absolutely something that can be done.
That's great. And then a couple more questions, and I think we'll leave it at this, but a couple more questions about the up to 3 stories, or is it 2 stories? Can you help us finesse exactly where the exemption is?
Yeah, I wish I could say that this was absolutely clear. Unfortunately, you get into, for example, again, the property that I did down in the Keys. Did the parking area underneath count as a story? Because it really isn't livable space. And unfortunately, we really don't have a firm answer. Again, the state is supposed to be developing a little bit better guidelines for us. And again, those guidelines are due at the end of the year, along with the form report. So hopefully, maybe they'll answer some of those questions at that time. But for this first round, I think the safe assumption is that if you are 3 stories, no matter what, above ground, 3 stories above ground. So if you have a basement, which is rare down here in South Florida, but again, if we're talking up in northern Florida, perhaps hearing that there, that perhaps doesn't apply. But again, I'll go back to what I've said multiple times. The insurance companies and mortgage companies are really, really focused on making sure that condominiums are taking care of themselves, and co-ops, but we don't have quite as many co-ops down here as we do up north.
I do actually, I just want to get one more in that
Mhm.
seems straightforward. I could be wrong. You never know. It says we have a complete milestone inspection. Where do I submit it to the city of West Palm Beach?
Okay,
Seems
so
simple enough.
that one actually is relatively straightforward. So the
Okay.
good news on the SIRS is that's just an internal document. At some of these presentations, I used to say that, the state didn't create a SERS police. No one's going to come out knocking on your door. We all know that every association has this person, but the only way, that really is going to be an issue there is if someone within your own association says, "Hey, wait a minute, this wasn't done or wasn't done right." There's some, again, I will defer to the legal counsel there and KBR and guys that, as far as dispute resolution, there are some provisions in the statute if that happens. Um, but the big thing is just having the SERS done and having it in again, you have to keep that for like 15 years after it's issued. Now, the Milestone report, and it's getting better. This time last year, I towards the, I guess, January timeframe is what I'm thinking of. Again, the engineer under the law is supposed to be the one submitting it directly to the AHJ. West Palm is still kind of working that out. Um, and so hopefully within the next month or so, again, I know buildings that are subject to this, that West Palm still hasn't even issued them a notice that they have to do it. So West Palm is a little bit behind. Again, as where I was going to earlier this year, I've had municipalities literally refuse to accept our reports because they were given the responsibility, but they weren't given any additional funding, and they weren't given any guidelines on how to incorporate it yet. Stay tuned. Hopefully that'll get better, and those guidelines will be forthcoming. But I think on this go round, it's going to be a kind of a play it by year. Um, yeah, and again, West Palm, I have several reports kind of in our queue waiting to go to West Palm. So I'm still waiting for that answer myself.
Um, I know I said one more, maybe two questions ago. You guys keep submitting them, and we have a bunch that haven't been answered. So I do encourage you to reach out to David directly. I won't speak for him, but he may be willing to answer a couple more of these questions if you reach out to him. But Christine, I see you in here. You've asked this question twice, and it seems like you're struggling to really find the answer. So does the 40-50 year replace the visual MSI? Please, I cannot find an answer to this, she says.
So officially Miami-Dade, and I haven't heard officially for Broward, but I would be stunned if they did not follow suit. Miami-Dade has officially said, first off, we're changing it to 30 years from 40 years. We're changing it to 30. And that is what that not only will we, that is the only thing we will accept as the report for the state milestone. I expect Broward to follow along because again, they tend to follow along. So what you're going to see is at least Broward, Miami-Dade. We've already seen it in Miami-Dade. Again, those requirements are one and the same. So you'll submit one report that'll cover both the 30-year requirement local for Miami-Dade, as well as one report. That same report will count towards the state requirement for the milestone inspection. City of Boca Raton is the same way. They actually have their own forms as well. And again, they've said the same thing, that one report, the report that is on their form, that's what that not only will, but again, the only form that they will accept as a state form.
Thank you so much, David. This has been a wealth of information. I know you guys, continue to see questions pouring in. I really do encourage you to connect with David directly. And like I said, maybe he'd be willing to answer a couple more questions. You will be able to find this screen recording, the Zoom recording on acebytsk.com in our resources section, and then in the next day or so. And if you haven't grabbed the evaluation form in the chat feature at the very bottom of your screen, please do so now. That's where you'll be able to fill it out and receive the slides and opportunities to connect with David and with our other fantastic vendors.